I am Evelyn Harper, 64 years old, and for over 40 years I worked as a bookkeeper for a small construction company in Ohio. Numbers were my refuge, a sanctuary of order when the world at home often felt chaotic. I was a widow, and for decades I believed my purpose was simple: to raise my two sons, Lucas and Ethan. Every choice, every sacrifice I made circled back to them. But tonight, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in my arms and machines beeping around me, I realized a truth sharper than any scalpel. My sons had chosen a baseball game over standing by their mother's bedside. That isn't a metaphor. Those were the exact words I heard, half-conscious, when the doctor called them. The doctor's voice trembled as he explained, "Evelyn, this may be your last night." And without hesitation Lucas answered, "We can't leave. We're at the game." Ethan's voice echoed in the background, light and casual, almost laughing. That sentence cut deeper than the heart attack that had brought me here. I had been rushed to the hospital, unconscious. The doctors tried everything, called my sons, but their reply remained the same: "We can't. We're at the game." Even after being told my life hung in the balance, they didn't come. A week later they finally arrived, but my bed was empty. Only a single note lay in its place. When they read it, the color drained from their faces. That's where this story truly begins. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've poured every ounce of yourself into people who look the other way, this story will resonate. Take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Not for me, but because sharing our stories reminds others they are not alone. That night in the ICU is etched into my memory. The lights above were cold and harsh, the taste of metal clung to my mouth, and every beep of the monitor sounded like a countdown. I could barely move, but I could hear everything: the nurses, the phones, the quiet murmurs of the staff. And when the doctor shook his head and said, "They are not coming," I felt a silence louder than the machines. Not the silence of death, but the silence of realization. Life flashed before me in ledger lines and receipts. All the bills I paid, the uniforms I washed, the birthday cakes I baked alone after my husband died. And now, in my weakest hour, all of it weighed against a baseball game, and I lost. Picture this. You lie in a hospital bed, the doctor urges your children to come say goodbye, and you hear them refuse, almost laughing. What breaks first, the heart or the faith you had in them? In that moment I saw the truth no mother wants to face. My sons no longer saw me as their mother or even as a person. I had become background noise, an obligation that could wait. Something inside me shifted. I was done being invisible. So when they finally came, expecting a frail mother waiting for them, they found only a note. In it I told them what I had never shared. I was not born into ease. My parents worked in factories and taught me the value of stretching every dollar. At 19 I took a waitress job in a small diner outside Cleveland. The hours were long, the pay little, but I learned to smile through aching feet and a back that screamed. I thought life would get easier after marriage. I met Thomas when I was 22. He was a mechanic, gentle and kind, with grease under his fingernails and laughter that filled every room. We married in a small church with borrowed flowers and a cake baked by my aunt. He gave me a simple gold band, and to me it symbolized everything. Not wealth, but love, hope, and the life we built together. It was about building a family together, and we did. Lucas came first, wailing with a head full of dark hair that seemed to belong to someone much older than a newborn. Ethan followed 2 years later, quieter, observant, but just as precious. Suddenly, my world was no longer my own. Every breath, every hour, every choice revolved around them. When money was tight, I cut corners everywhere except on my boys. I patched my own shoes with tape, but Lucas got new cleats for his baseball games. I skipped lunch after lunch so Ethan could attend piano lessons for a whole year, even though he quit eventually. I told myself that was love, sacrifice worn like armor. Thomas worked hard, steady and kind, but life is seldom fair. He got sick, terribly sick, and far too soon. Cancer does not care how deeply you love, nor that two little boys still needed their father. One day he was laughing in the kitchen, telling a story I've long forgotten. The next he was in a hospital bed. Within a year he was gone. I was 36, a widow with 2 children and a mortgage I could barely manage. I didn't know how I would survive, but I looked at my boys and promised I would. I took extra shifts at the diner, my back aching, eyes stinging from fluorescent lights. Nights were spent studying bookkeeping, learning the language of numbers that would eventually give us stability. Eventually, I found a steady job at a small construction company. Ledgers, calculators, and spreadsheets became my new routine. Kept the roof over our heads. Even then, every choice hurt in ways that only mothers understand. When Lucas begged to join a travel baseball league, the fee was beyond what I could afford. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the bill, feeling the weight of impossibility. That night, I opened the drawer where I kept Thomas's wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry he ever gave me besides my band. I sold it at a pawn shop downtown. That money paid for Lucas's place on the team. I told myself Thomas would have wanted it that way. There were nights the washing machine broke and I scrubbed uniforms by hand in the sink. Red clay bled into the water, leaving my fingers raw. I can still see myself hanging jerseys across the backyard, stiff with soap, praying they would dry by morning. Ethan's glove tore right before an important game. We couldn't afford a new one. I stayed up late sewing the leather back together with fishing line, hands trembling with fatigue. When he slipped it on the next day, it worked perfectly, and that was enough for me. Every parent tells themselves these sacrifices are invisible gifts, that one day their children will recognize them. I believed it. Foolishly, I thought my boys would remember. But in the end they did not. At the time, I convinced myself it was worth it. I used to say that sacrifice was love, that it was noble, that it made me strong. What I did not see was how those quiet acts taught my children that my needs, my health, even my dignity could always come last. I see that clearly now. Back then, I wore my sacrifices like a badge of honor. I told myself I was doing God's work by giving everything for my boys. I didn't notice how that silence, that quiet endurance, slowly trained them to take me for granted. I remember one winter vividly. The heating bill soared and I could not pay it in full. The house grew cold. My breath frosted the kitchen as I cooked. But Lucas wanted new batting gloves and I chose them over turning up the thermostat. My hands cracked and bled in the cold, but when he unwrapped the gloves at Christmas, his smile was radiant. That smile was my warmth, or so I thought. I never bought myself anything new. My coat had holes in the pockets. The strap of my purse was frayed. But Lucas and Ethan had what they needed to stand shoulder to shoulder with the other kids, to feel they belonged. That mattered more to me than belonging anywhere myself. There were nights I stayed up late after closing the diner, counting tips. $42. Just enough for Ethan's school field trip the next morning. I ate stale crackers in the dark kitchen and cried, not from hunger but relief. He would not be left behind, forgotten. Years stacked up like fragile plates, cracked and glued back together. The weight of it all pressed on my shoulders, but I carried it. I carried it because I thought that was what mothers do. And in those long, quiet hours, folding laundry, scrubbing dishes, I whispered to myself over and over that this was love. I used to tell myself sacrifice was love. I wanted to believe that every sleepless night, every dollar spent, every aching muscle and bone would one day return to me in the form of respect, gratitude, maybe even tenderness from my sons. But lying in that hospital bed decades later, listening to Lucas and Ethan refuse to leave a baseball game to see me, I realized the mantra was a lie. Sacrifice is not love. Love is love. Sacrifice without recognition only breeds entitlement. That was a truth I could no longer ignore. By the time Lucas and Ethan were grown men, I thought some of the weight would lift from my shoulders. I imagined a life where the bills weren't all mine to juggle, where I could sleep without counting car payments, rent, or school fees. But the truth is, my boys never left my nest. They simply built their lives on top of mine as if my back were permanent scaffolding. Lucas was the first to slip. After college, he racked up credit card debt chasing weekends in Las Vegas with his friends. One night he called, his voice tight with shame. "Mom, I just need this one bailout. I swear it's the last time." I drained what little savings I had, money I had been keeping for a new roof, and paid the balance. I told myself it was love. Ethan wasn't different. He bought a car far beyond his means, seduced by glossy ads and the idea of freedom. When the repo men came knocking, I wrote the check to save his pride. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that one day when they were older, wiser, steadier, they would see what I had done and carry me for a change. But that day never came. I became their invisible safety net, always stretched thin. And once a net is always there, people forget it has limits. They leap recklessly, certain they won't hit the ground. I kept it all quiet. My coworkers never knew my paycheck was divided 3 ways. My pastor never heard me confess how many nights I ate canned soup so my sons could keep their lights on. Even Lucas and Ethan never knew the full extent because I let them believe the help came easy. I didn't want them to feel the weight I carried. Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor, saw through me. She was a sharp-eyed widow who had raised 4 children of her own. She used to lean on her fence, arms crossed, watching me lug groceries or mow the lawn alone. One afternoon, after I had covered yet another overdue bill for Lucas, I must have let my exhaustion show. She called out, "Evelyn, you cannot keep doing this." I laughed, adjusting the heavy bags in my arms. "They just need time. They're good boys. They'll find their footing," I said. Mrs. Alvarez shook her head. "Your sons will never grow up if you keep holding the crutch for them," she said in her soft, unwavering voice. Her words lingered, but I dismissed them with a smile. I wanted to believe my sacrifices still mattered, that my boys still needed me. Without them needing me, what would I be? So I continued. When Lucas's marriage crumbled under financial strain, I helped cover his apartment rent so his children wouldn't have to move. When Ethan lost his job after showing up late one too many times, I let him stay in my spare room, his laundry piled high, while I tiptoed around, still cooking his favorite meals. I remember one night at the kitchen table staring at the checkbook. My bank balance barely reached 3 figures, yet Lucas's voice echoed in my mind, "Mom, just this once more." The pen felt impossibly heavy in my hand as I wrote the check. I told myself that was what mothers do. That same week, Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my door carrying a plate of tamales. She set them on the counter and looked me straight in the eye. "Evelyn," she said, "love is not rescuing. Love is teaching them to swim, not carrying them on your back forever." I wanted to argue, to insist that without me they would drown. Instead, I forced a thin smile. "They'll get there. I still feel needed," I said. The truth was, I clung to that feeling. Needed. If they ever stopped needing me, I feared I would vanish into the background, just another old widow with no purpose. My sacrifices, I thought, were my ticket to relevance. But slowly, the sacrifices shifted from noble to humiliating. I hid overdue notices from my own mailbox, tearing them into tiny pieces before anyone could see. The quiet endurance I once wore like armor became a heavy, invisible prison. I had pawned my jewelry, the last pieces Thomas had given me. I skipped my own medical appointments because co-pays felt extravagant compared to Lucas's phone bill or Ethan's car insurance. I told no one, not my church group, not my boss, not even Mrs. Alvarez when she pressed. To the outside world, I was still the strong mother who held her family together. To myself, I was a bank that never closed, an anchor no one respected, yet everyone depended on. Looking back, the pattern is clear. Every last time was followed by another. Every promise to change drowned in silence. Every warning from Mrs. Alvarez was brushed aside by my desperate need to feel important. I can still see her standing on the fence line, arms crossed, shaking her head. Your sons will never grow up if you keep holding the crutch for them. At the time I thought she was wrong. I believed I was building loyalty, that one day Lucas and Ethan would see how much of myself I had given away. I was wrong. I had always marked Thomas's birthday and our wedding anniversary with quiet ritual. Even after he passed, I kept it alive. I would cook his favorite meal, lasagna layered thick with ricotta and mozzarella, and set the table as if he might walk in from the fields like he used to. For years, it was just me and the memory of him. But this year I wanted my sons to come home. I called Lucas first. "It's the day your father and I were married," I said, trying to keep my voice light, not pleading. "Maybe you and Ethan could come over for dinner. I'm making lasagna." There was a pause. Then his voice returned, distracted. Mom, tonight's the big game. We've got tickets. Maybe another night." I tried not to let the disappointment leak into my voice. "Of course," I said softly. "Enjoy the game." I called Ethan anyway, hoping he might be different. He laughed gently. "Mom, you know how much Lucas loves baseball. I can't ditch him. We'll come by this weekend instead." I told him it was fine. I always told them it was fine. That evening I pulled out the lasagna dish anyway. The kitchen smelled of garlic and tomatoes, the oven humming like an old friend. I laid the table with 3 plates. I polished the silverware, the good set Thomas and I had received as a wedding gift, and even set out 2 wine glasses for the boys, though I knew they would remain empty. When I stepped back, the table looked both full and heartbreakingly bare. 2 empty chairs faced me, waiting for sons who would never arrive. I folded the napkins neatly, smoothing them with my hand. The silence in the house pressed on my chest. I lit a candle in the center of the table, its flame flickering as if mocking me. I sat down with my plate, lasagna steaming in front of me, and tried to eat. Each bite felt impossibly heavy. My eyes wandered to the empty plates, the untouched glasses. I imagined Lucas and Ethan cheering in the stadium, the roar of the crowd drowning out any thought of me. For them it was just another night. For me it was a wound reopening. Halfway through the meal my chest tightened. At first I thought it was the weight of sadness, but the pain grew sharper, searing through my ribs like fire. I gasped, clutching the table for balance. The fork clattered from my hand onto the plate. I tried to stand, but my legs gave way. The room spun. I collapsed to the cold tile floor of the kitchen, the scent of garlic mingling with the sterile tang of fear. My breaths came shallow and rapid. Sweat dripped from my forehead, my body heavy, too heavy to move. Through the fog I whispered Thomas's name. And then, in the dark edges of my mind, I wondered if this was how it ended. On the floor of a kitchen I had spent a lifetime keeping warm, alone, unnoticed. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. Then came the sharp rap of knuckles on the window. A familiar voice. Mrs. Alvarez. She often stopped by in the evenings, sometimes with leftover tamales, sometimes just to chat. She must have seen the flickering candle in the window or sensed something was wrong. "Evelyn," she called. Louder this time. "Evelyn. Are you there?" I wanted to answer, but my voice caught in my throat. I heard her footsteps on the porch, then the creak of the door as she pushed it open. "Evelyn," she cried when she saw me sprawled on the kitchen floor. Her hands were on my face a moment later, warm and trembling. "Oh God, hold on, Evelyn. I'm calling 911. The sound of her phone dialing was a lifeline. Her voice was urgent but steady as she spoke to the dispatcher. 64-year-old woman, severe chest pain. She's collapsed. She's not responsive. Yes, 184 Maple Street. Hurry. She stayed by my side, brushing my hair from my face, whispering words I could barely hear. Stay with me, Evelyn. You're not leaving us tonight. The sirens came fast, their wail piercing the quiet of the neighborhood. Red and blue lights flashed across the walls of my kitchen, a surreal dance of color over the plates still waiting at the table. 2 paramedics rushed in, lifting me gently onto a stretcher. I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Alvarez standing in the doorway, hands pressed together in prayer. As they wheeled me out, my eyes landed on the table one last time. The lasagna cooling, the wine glasses empty, the chairs still waiting. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Inside, a medic's voice cut through the blur. Stay with us, ma'am. Can you hear me? I tried to answer, but the world blurred, pain pulling me under. The last thing I thought before darkness edged in was that Lucas and Ethan were cheering in the stands, oblivious to the fact that their mother was fighting for her life. And I, Evelyn Harper, was utterly alone. When I woke, voices murmured around me, muffled at first as though I were underwater. The sharp beeps of machines punctuated the haze, and I realized I was in a hospital bed. My chest felt heavy, wrapped in fire. Tubes ran into my arms. I blinked against the sterile lights above me, breaths shallow and ragged. Then I heard the doctor's voice, calm but urgent, speaking into the phone. Yes, this is Dr. Matthews. I'm calling about your mother, Evelyn Harper. She's in critical condition. I need you to understand, she may not survive tonight. The words cut through the fog like shards of glass. My heart stuttered as I waited for the reply. A man's voice crackled back, unmistakable. Lucas, we can't leave. We're at the ball game. Thought I must have misheard. Surely he hadn't said that. But the silence that followed confirmed the truth. The doctor's voice grew more insistent. Sir, I'm telling you, this may be her last night. If you want to see her, you need to come now. Lucas's voice came again, flat, impatient. I told you we're at the game. We'll check in later. The line went dead. I lay there, the weight of the words pressing harder than the pain in my chest. My son, my boy, whom I had raised with every ounce of strength and sacrifice, had chosen a stadium seat over my bedside. My lips parted, but no sound came. The doctor glanced at me, perhaps realizing I had heard. His face softened with pity, and that pity was almost worse than the pain itself. Minutes later, another call. The doctor tried Ethan. His voice was lighter, almost rehearsed. Doc, I can't just walk out. Lucas is here with me. We'll come by tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow, the doctor said as if tomorrow were promised, and the line went dead again. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the specks of gray, trying to anchor myself. The truth was undeniable now. My sons were not coming. Not tonight. Maybe not at all. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back. Crying would take energy I did not have. My chest rose and fell in uneven waves. Each breath was a battle I wasn't sure I could win. The door creaked and a nurse slipped in. Young, with kind eyes and dark hair pulled into a bun, she checked my monitors and adjusted my four. Then she noticed my trembling hand half-curled on the blanket. Without hesitation, she reached out, wrapping her warm fingers around mine. I'm here, she whispered. Just 2 words, simple, soft, but they filled the cavern of my loneliness in a way my sons' voices never could. Her hand stayed with mine, steady and unflinching. Machines hummed, my breath wheezed, and in the quiet of that moment, I realized something I had avoided for years. I was not their priority. The thought cut through me, sharp and merciless. For decades, I had told myself sacrifice was love, that if I gave enough, bent enough, carried enough, my boys would see my worth. But lying in that hospital bed, abandoned while they cheered for a game that couldn't even spell their names, I finally understood the truth. Sacrifice had not bound them to me. It had excused them. It had given them permission to take without ever learning to give. I closed my eyes, drifting in and out of a restless doze. Sometimes I dreamed of Thomas, his hand resting on mine, his voice telling me I had done enough. Other times I woke to the nurse's quiet movements, her presence like a candle flickering in the dark. At one point she adjusted my oxygen mask and said softly, "You're stronger than you think." Stronger. I wanted to laugh. My body felt like a failing engine sputtering with every breath. But in the hollow space where my son's love should have been, a tiny ember glowed. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps strength wasn't measured in the body, but in finally seeing things clearly. The night dragged on, each hour an eternity. Monitors beeped, IVs dripped, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. My room remained still, empty except for the nurse's occasional visits. I kept replaying their words in my mind. "We can't leave. We're at the ball game." A sentence that should never belong to a son whose mother was dying. And yet it was mine to carry, carved into me like stone. As dawn crept through the narrow window, pale light brushing the linoleum floor, I lay awake hollow, but something inside me began to shift. Reckoning. I had lived believing love was proven by what I gave. But what good was sacrifice if it left me alone in my hour of need? What kind of love demanded I vanish piece by piece until nothing remained of me? The nurse came in one last time before her shift ended. She squeezed my hand again, her eyes tired but still kind. "You made it through the night," she said softly. "Yes," I whispered, my voice hoarse but steady. "I did." But inside I was thinking something more. Not just that I had survived, but that I had woken. That the long night had shown me a truth I could no longer deny. I was not their priority. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop making them mine. The following morning, the nurse returned with a clipboard of forms. I asked her quietly, almost shyly, "Could you bring me a sheet of paper and a pen?" She tilted her head, curious, but didn't press. Within minutes, she came back with hospital stationery and a blue ballpoint pen. She set them gently on the rolling tray beside my bed. My hands trembled as I reached for them, the four tugging at my skin. The paper looked so clean, so expectant. I stared at it for a long while, letting the silence of the room settle around me. Outside, I could hear carts squeaking past, the faint chatter of nurses changing shifts. Inside there was only me, the pen, and the weight of decades pressing down. I thought of all the words I had never said. All the nights I had prayed for strength. All the times I swallowed my disappointment, convinced silence was the same as love. My hand began to move. "Lucas, Ethan, if you are reading this, it means you arrived too late." I paused, the ink pooling at the tip of the pen. My eyes blurred, but I forced myself to continue. "I didn't write this to wound them. I wrote this so they would finally see me. Not as the mother who always stood in the shadows of their choices, but as the woman who gave everything and was left with nothing." My breath caught, but I pressed on. I let the memories pour out, unfiltered. The nights I worked double shifts at the diner, feet blistered, back aching, just so Lucas could have new cleats. The day I sold my wedding ring to cover league fees. The countless times I scrubbed Ethan's uniforms in the sink, knuckles raw, while they slept soundly in warm beds. I wrote of the calls from creditors, the red-stamped envelopes, the quiet deals I made to cover their mistakes, how I shielded them from the word debt, thinking I was sparing them shame when in truth I was burying myself deeper. And then I wrote the line that had haunted me all night. "I was there in the first bleachers. You weren't in the last." The words lay stark against the page, heavier than any sentence I had ever spoken. I set the pen down, letting my fingers rest. My chest ached, but there was a strange relief in finally releasing it all. For the first time, my truth had shape, had weight beyond the confines of my body. Then I reached for my purse, which the nurse had placed on the chair by the wall. With effort, I unzipped the worn leather and searched inside. Beneath a folded grocery receipt and a tube of faded lipstick, I found what I was looking for: a ticket stub. The first game I ever took Lucas to. He was 7, eyes wide and sparkling like the stadium lights themselves. His little hands clutched the bag of peanuts I had saved for weeks to buy. The team had lost miserably, but it hadn't mattered. What mattered was that we were there together. The stub was crumpled now, its ink faded, but I had kept it all these years. Proof of my presence, proof that I had shown up. I slipped it carefully between the pages of the letter, securing it like a seal, a relic of love but also of absence. When the nurse returned, she noticed the paper folded neatly on the tray. "Would you like me to place this somewhere safe?" she asked gently. I nodded. "On the bed. If they come and I'm not here, they'll find it." She hesitated for a moment, as though she understood the weight of what I had written, then placed it carefully at the foot of the bed. I leaned back against the pillow, exhausted but strangely lighter. My body still ached, my breath still shallow, but my spirit felt unburdened. I had finally spoken the truth I had hidden for too long. For the rest of the day I drifted in and out of sleep. Sometimes I dreamed of the bleachers, the roar of the crowd, the smell of popcorn in the air. Other times I dreamed of silence, of sitting alone in my kitchen with 2 empty chairs. When I woke, the letter was still there, waiting like me. I knew my sons might never read it the way I intended. They might skim, dismiss it, even tear it apart in anger. But the act of writing it was for me as much as it was for them. It was my line in the sand, my final say. And if they ever did read it, perhaps, just perhaps, they would see beyond the ink. They would see the years I had poured into them, the quiet sacrifices that had no scoreboard, no cheering crowd. As the evening shadow stretched across the floor, I whispered aloud, more to myself than anyone else, "Sacrifice is love, but love is not sacrifice." A truth I should have known years ago, but better late than never. I closed my eyes and let the room fade around me. The letter lay still at the end of the bed, its secret tucked inside, and for the first time in years, I felt I had said what needed saying. The next morning, the door creaked open and I saw a familiar figure step in. Mrs. Alvarez, my neighbor, walked softly toward my bed with a bouquet of carnations in her hands. They were pink, the kind she grew by her front porch every summer. "You didn't think I'd let you go through this alone, did you?" she said, her smile warm but tinged with worry. I tried to sit up straighter, though the 4 tugged against my arm. "You shouldn't have troubled yourself," I whispered. "Nonsense," she replied, pulling a chair to my bedside. She placed the flowers in a plastic cup and set it on the tray. The faint scent lifted the sterile air. For a moment we sat in silence. A kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of things neither of us needed to explain. Then she leaned closer. "You know, Evelyn, I once lay in a bed just like this. Not in this hospital, but one across town. It was after my gallbladder surgery. Do you know who I waited for?" I shook my head. "My daughter," she said, her voice steady but soft. "But she never came. She had other priorities. A new boyfriend, a job she thought couldn't wait. And there I was, staring at the clock, hoping the next tick meant she'd walk in." Her words landed like stones in water, rippling through my own memories. I remembered the hours I had waited for Lucas and Ethan, the phone pressed to my ear as the doctor tried again, their voices sharp with disinterest. Mrs. Alvarez continued, "I thought it was just me, that I had failed somehow as a mother, that I hadn't given enough, or maybe I'd given too much. I tortured myself with the what. But then I realized." She paused, looking me in the eyes, her gaze moist but firm. "It wasn't me. It was them," I whispered. "Their choices, their blindness. My worth wasn't measured by their presence or absence." Evelyn Harper's hand reached across the blanket and covered mine. Warmth spread through my cold fingers. Tears pricked my eyes before I could stop them. I always believed sacrifice was love, I admitted. That if I gave enough, it would be returned. She shook her head gently. Sacrifice is only love if it's recognized. Otherwise, it's erosion. It eats away at you, Evelyn. And you don't deserve to be eaten away. I studied her face, the lines carved deep from years of labor and endurance. Yet behind them there was strength. The kind that comes not from never being broken but from surviving the breaking. In her reflection I saw myself. The same ache, the same yearning, the same realization that we had given too much and received too little. And yet, sitting there together, I felt something stir. A thread of connection, a reminder that the emptiness wasn't mine alone to carry. For the first time I said it aloud. I am not their priority. The words trembled from my lips, but once spoken, they steadied. It felt like a wound being cleaned. Stinging but necessary. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed my hand. And that doesn't mean you aren't worthy. It just means it's time to choose yourself. Her words settled into me like medicine. Not the bitter kind, but the healing kind I didn't know I needed until it began to work. I let out a long breath. We are not alone, are we? She smiled, her eyes shining. No, Evelyn. Never alone. There are more of us than you think. We sat like that for a while, hand in hand. Two women bound not by blood, but by understanding. And in that stillness I felt something stronger than despair. I felt solidarity. The letter I had written the night before was still folded at the foot of my bed. I thought of it then not with grief but with clarity. My truth wasn't just mine anymore. It echoed in others. Like Mrs. Alvarez, like countless women who had carried the same hidden scars. As she rose to leave, she leaned down and kissed my forehead. Rest, she said. And remember, Evelyn, your story isn't over. When the door closed behind her, the room no longer felt so empty. For the first time in years I felt seen, and that scene gave me strength. A week passed before my sons finally appeared. By then I was no longer in the hospital bed. I had been discharged to rest at home, the machines and sterile walls exchanged for the quiet of my own house. But the nurse later told me what happened the day they walked in. They looked like ghosts when they read your words, she said. I closed my eyes, letting her description paint the scene in my mind. I could imagine them. Lucas in his pressed khakis, Ethan with his backward baseball cap, still carrying the careless stride of youth. They had probably walked in confident the world would wait for them, confident I would wait for them. But what they found instead was absence. The bed was stripped clean, the sheets tucked tight, the pillows fluffed. On that empty space lay a single folded letter, my handwriting on the front, their names written in a careful line. Between the pages I had tucked the faded baseball ticket, the first one I had ever bought, saved after selling Thomas's wedding ring, just so Lucas could feel like he belonged among the other boys. The nurse told me they froze when they saw it. Neither reached for the letter at first, as if the paper itself might burn. Finally, Ethan picked it up, his hand trembling. He unfolded it, and as his eyes moved across the words, the color drained from his face. I had written, I was there in the first bleachers, cheering until my voice cracked. I patched your uniforms, cooked your meals, paid your debts in silence. I believed sacrifice was love, but love without respect is only servitude. Tonight the doctor said I might not survive. And when they called you, you chose seats in the stadium over a chair at my bedside. That is when I finally saw the truth. You were not there in my last bleachers. You never came, and I cannot carry this illusion anymore. Ethan's lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but no words came. Lucas tried to take the letter from him, but when his eyes scanned the same lines, his shoulders slumped. For the first time they saw me, not as a background figure, not as the silent provider, but as a woman who had lived, loved, and broken under the weight of their neglect. They didn't say a word, Evelyn, the nurse told me. They just stood there, pale as stone. When they left, it was like they were carrying the weight of a coffin. I listened in silence as she recounted it, her voice low, her hands folding the blanket at the foot of my bed. She didn't need to embellish, I could feel it. For once, the mirror had turned and they were forced to look at themselves. For once, I whispered, they finally saw me. The words left my lips not with anger, not with triumph, but with a deep exhale that seemed to drain years of sorrow from my chest. I did not wish them destruction. I did not imagine revenge in flames and fury. My justice was quieter, enduring. It was the justice of truth finally spoken, of sacrifice finally named for what it had become. A chain I was choosing to set down. That night, lying in my own bed, the letter's words replayed in my mind, not with regret. I had spent too many years drowning in regret. This time I felt release. I had told them my truth, and whether they could carry it or not was no longer mine to decide. I thought back to Mrs. Alvarez, sitting beside me, her hand warm on mine, her words echoing. It wasn't me. It was them. She had been right. And now my sons had to live with the knowledge of their own choices. Perhaps one day they would understand the depth of what they had thrown aside. Perhaps one day they would come, not out of obligation but out of recognition. But even if that day never came, I had finally found a kind of peace. Because I had seen it in their faces, even secondhand through the nurse's story. I had seen the moment the illusion shattered. The moment they realized that love is not a bottomless well, that a mother is not immortal, that my heart had limits they had pushed too far. And in that recognition, in their shock and hesitation, I had received my justice. Quiet, dignified, but powerful. As the night deepened and the house fell silent around me, I whispered again into the darkness. For once they finally saw me. I let myself rest, not as their servant, not as their safety net, but as Evelyn Harper, a woman who had given and at last had chosen to reclaim her own worth. The following week, once my strength returned enough for me to walk without clutching the walls, I made an appointment with Mr. Green, the community lawyer who had known my late husband, Thomas. His office was a modest brick building near the courthouse, lined with shelves of case files and photographs from local charity drives. He looked up when I entered, his kind eyes widening with both surprise and relief. "Evelyn," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "You gave us all quite a scare. Sit down. What brings you here?" I eased into the chair, folding my hands in my lap. For a moment I let the silence settle. Then I spoke the words I had carried for decades but never dared to voice. "Mr. Green, I need to draw new boundaries. I need a living trust, and I need it to reflect my choices, not my son's expectations." He leaned back, studying me. "This is not just paperwork for you, is it?" "No," I replied, my voice steady. "This is me reclaiming myself. For years, I funneled everything I owned into protecting Lucas and Ethan. I paid off their credit card debt, covered back rent when they were about to be evicted, even co-signed loans that nearly drowned me. Each time I told myself it was what mothers do. Each time I believed I was saving them from ruin. But all I did was save them from growing up. Now I'm done." We went through the documents together, his pen scratching against the paper as he drafted clauses. I named myself as the primary trustee with clear instructions for what would happen when I passed. My sons were not excluded entirely, but they were no longer the center of my legacy. Instead, I designated a large portion of my savings to create a community scholarship in my husband Thomas's name, a way to honor the love we had shared, the sacrifices we had both made, and to give young people the opportunities my boys had squandered. As I signed the papers, a strange lightness lifted within me, as though the ink itself had carried away years of weight. Mr. Green looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You know," he said softly, "this is one of the bravest acts of love I've seen. Not for them but for yourself. and for the ones who will never forget what you've done." I smiled, feeling the truth of it deep in my chest. At last, I was free to live my life on my own terms. I nodded, my eyes misting. For once, it wasn't about rescuing them. It was about building something that lasted. We also updated my emergency contacts. I told Mr. Green to add Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor who had called 911 when I collapsed. She had shown up when my own children had not. She deserved that trust. And more than that, I deserved to know that if the worst happened, someone who truly cared would be called. When I left his office, the sun was setting, painting the courthouse steps in orange light. My folder of documents felt heavier than its paper should allow, but also solid, grounding. It was proof that my life was no longer tethered to two men who had never shown up when it mattered most. That night, as I prepared a simple dinner, I thought back to the countless times I had dug into my emergency fund for Lucas and Ethan. I remembered signing checks with shaking hands, worried about how I would pay the utilities after bailing them out. I remembered standing in a bank lobby, co-signing a loan for Lucas's failed business while he assured me, "I'll pay it back, Mom." I swear, he never did. Ethan had once called me crying because his car was about to be repossessed. I had drained half my savings to cover the payments, telling myself that a mother's love demanded sacrifice. But what it had really demanded was silence. Silence about my own needs. Silence about my own worth. As I sat alone at the table, I realized that silence had ended the moment I signed those papers. The twist of irony was not lost on me. After all those years of rescuing them from bankruptcy, from failure, from the consequences of their own choices, it was now I who was finally rescuing myself. By stopping, by letting go, by choosing not to play savior anymore. I set my fork down and whispered into the stillness of my kitchen, "It's over." Not with bitterness, but with a quiet finality that tasted like freedom. For the first time in decades, I could imagine a future not built on sacrifice but on purpose. The scholarship would carry my husband Thomas's name long after I was gone. Mrs. Alvarez would be my safeguard, and I, Evelyn, would no longer be defined by debts, disappointments, or the endless echo of stadium cheers that never once turned back to see me. That night, I slept without the weight of worry pressing against my chest. I slept not as the mother who gave everything away, but as the woman who had finally drawn a line, and in that line I found myself. It was a gray afternoon when the knock came. I knew before opening the door who it would be. Lucas stood on the porch, shoulders tight, eyes restless, like a boy caught stealing but too proud to admit it. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his words spilling out before I could even greet him. "Mom, how could you? Do you have any idea how this makes us feel? You set up some scholarship. You change everything without telling us. Do you realize you're making us feel guilty?" His voice carried both accusation and desperation, the familiar tone of someone who had always leaned on my shoulders, never once imagining I might shrug the weight off. I let him speak. Years of motherhood had taught me the value of patience. But this time it was not patience born of submission. It was a stillness carved from clarity. When he finally paused, expecting me to rush in with an apology as I had so many times before, I shook my head gently. "No, Lucas," I said, my voice calm. "I didn't do it to make you feel guilty. I did it so that I no longer feel sorry for myself." His eyes widened, confusion flashing across his face. It was as if he had expected every reaction except this one. For the first time, I watched him search for words instead of flooding me with them. "I don't understand," he muttered. "You don't have to," I answered softly. "What you need to know is this: I gave everything I had for years. I gave so much that I lost track of who I was outside of being your safety net. And when I needed you most, you chose the ball game. That night, lying in a hospital bed, I realized I couldn't keep living as a ghost in my own life. So I changed the ending. He flinched as though my words were heavier than any shouted rebuke could have been. He looked around my kitchen, his gaze landing on the dining table, and for the first time, the emptiness of those years stared back at him. There were only 2 chairs now, neatly pushed in. "Where are the others?" Lucas asked quietly, perhaps noticing what was missing more than what was present. "I gave them away," I replied. "I don't wait for anyone to fill empty chairs anymore. If someone wants to be here, they'll bring their own." The silence that followed was thick. He shifted, uneasy, his hands clenching at his sides. I could see the boy in him, the one who had once relied on me to wash his muddy uniform, to cheer from the bleachers, to rescue him with checks and signatures. But I also saw the man he had become, or perhaps refused to become, when I had shielded him too long. "Mom," he started, his voice breaking for the first time. "We just—" I raised my hand gently, not to silence him in anger, but to draw the boundary that had been absent for far too long. "This isn't a conversation to fix what's broken overnight," I said. "It's a door, and I'm choosing to close it for now. If one day you want to stand at it as a man, not a boy demanding rescue, then maybe it can open again, but not today." I rose slowly, steady on my feet. For once he seemed smaller than me, not in height but in presence. I walked to the door, placed my hand on the knob and opened it. He hesitated as if he might argue again, but when he met my eyes he found no anger there, only the quiet power of someone who had finally chosen herself. Without another word I stepped aside. He walked out, shoulders sagging as though carrying a weight he had never acknowledged before. I closed the door gently, the click of the lock echoing through the stillness of my house. I leaned against the wood, breathing deep. Behind me, the dining table stood with its 2 chairs, not waiting, not expecting, just enough for the life I had reclaimed. And for the first time, the emptiness was not loneliness. It was freedom. After the storm of confrontation, after the years of carrying burdens that were never mine alone, I finally made a move that was entirely for me. I packed my belongings. The essentials, a few photo frames, my worn Bible, the quilt my mother stitched decades ago. I left the large house that had echoed with emptiness for too long and stepped into a small apartment near the public library. It was modest. 1 bedroom and a narrow balcony that overlooked a row of maples. But it was mine. Every corner belonged to me, not as a caretaker for others, but as a woman who had earned peace. I ran my hands across the smooth countertop and smiled. For the first time, I wasn't setting a table for others. I wasn't arranging chairs to wait for those who might not come. This space did not beg for anyone's presence. It only asked for mine. The first night in that apartment, I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes. The silence was different here, not heavy or punishing but restful, like a pause between heartbeats. I looked around at my modest treasures and felt warmth spread inside me. Mrs. Alvarez had helped me carry a few boxes up the stairs, shaking her head at how little I kept, but I told her that lightness was a gift. She laughed. "Evelyn, maybe now you'll finally live for yourself." He was right. The next morning I walked 2 blocks to the library. Its tall brick walls and wide wooden doors felt like an embrace. I signed up for a new library card. The plastic still stiff in my hand, I ran my thumb across my name printed on it, smiling at the idea that even here in this small way I was starting anew. I wandered the aisles, breathing in the scent of paper and ink. Rows upon rows of stories lined up like promises. For years I had lived everyone else's story. Now I would choose my own. Later that week I did something simple but profound. I walked into the bakery across the street, the one with glass cases lined with frosted cakes and flaky pies. The clerk, a young woman with freckles, greeted me with a bright smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I'd like that chocolate cake, the one with the thick icing." She reached for the box. Special occasion? I paused, then smiled. Yes. For me. Her eyebrows lifted. Then she nodded with a kind of respect I hadn't expected. She slid the cake into a white box, tied it with red string, and handed it to me. It was heavier than I imagined, not just in weight but in meaning. For decades, I had baked and bought cakes for birthdays, graduations, baseball victories that never included me in the photograph. I had sliced them into pieces, serving everyone else first, keeping only the crumbs. That evening, I set the chocolate cake on my small kitchen table, lit a single candle, and cut myself a generous slice. I held the fork for a moment and whispered, "For decades, I served everyone else a slice. Tonight I eat mine whole." The first bite was sweet, almost overwhelming. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness but from release. Every flavor was a reminder that I deserved joy, that I had been starving not for food, but for acknowledgement, for respect, for permission to take up space in my own life. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the table. Only one plate, only one fork. And it was enough. In the weeks that followed, I built a new rhythm. Mornings at the library, afternoons tending potted plants on my balcony, evenings reading or writing letters that had no obligation, only choice. Sometimes Mrs. Alvarez would join me for tea, and we would sit in the golden light, two women who had known abandonment but had chosen resilience. My sons tried to call. I let the phone ring, not from hatred but from boundary. I no longer rushed to rescue them from themselves. They would have to face their own nights of silence. Perhaps in time they would learn what I had learned, that love without respect is only chains disguised as care. One evening, as I closed a book and watched the sunset paint the sky in streaks of pink and gold, I felt an unfamiliar sensation. Peace. It wasn't the absence of pain but the presence of dignity. I had not been erased by my sacrifices. I had simply been waiting all along to reclaim the woman who lived beneath them. The chocolate cake became my small ritual. Each month I bought a slice or baked one myself. Not because I craved sweets but because it reminded me that I no longer lived on crumbs. I lived on fullness. And in that small apartment near the library, with the quiet hum of life outside my window, I finally understood what freedom tasted like. Rich. Bittersweet. Entirely mine. Months passed and my days settled into a rhythm that felt like breathing for the first time in years. Each afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in shades of amber, I set out 2 teacups. Mrs. Alvarez would appear right on time, her steps slow but steady. She carried a small tin of cookies, insisting we share. We would sit at my tiny table, steam rising from our cups, the clink of porcelain filling the space once dominated by silence. Our conversations were gentle, sometimes filled with laughter, sometimes with pauses where our eyes did the speaking. She told me stories of her youth in Mexico, of the years she worked double shifts at the diner to give her children chances they never seemed to notice. I shared my own memories, some painful, some tender. Each time I spoke, I felt less like a woman defined by abandonment and more like one defined by survival. We had both lost the illusion of children who would stand by us. But in its place, we had gained something different. A chosen family, one built not on blood but on understanding. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the community center. My scholarship fund, the one I had set up with my savings, had chosen its first recipient. A girl named Emily. She was 14, a promising young athlete, the only girl on her school's baseball team. Her mother worked 2 jobs and her father had long since left. The scholarship would cover her gear, travel, and training fees. When I read her name aloud, Mrs. Alvarez clasped her hands together. "Dios mío, Evelyn," she said softly. "You are planting seeds." A week later, I attended a small ceremony at the community hall. The room was simple. Folding chairs, banners hand-painted by volunteers, the smell of coffee brewing in the back. Parents, children, neighbors filled the space with quiet pride. When Emily walked in, I saw myself reflected in her. A girl with bright eyes and a uniform too big for her thin frame, clutching her worn glove as if it were the most precious thing she owned. They called my name to the front. I walked slowly, each step steady, my heart beating not with fear but with fullness. Emily stood there, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I smiled at her and she returned it, shy yet fierce. I handed her the scholarship certificate, the official proof of support. Then reaching into my bag I pulled out a small wooden frame. Inside was the faded ticket from the very first baseball game I had ever attended for my sons. I had kept it for decades, tucked between bills, journals, and prayers. A reminder of where my sacrifices began. I pressed the frame into her hands. This, I said softly, was my first seat in the bleachers. I was there cheering with everything I had. I hope you carry it with you and remember that someone believes in you. Don't wait for anyone to see your light. Shine anyway. Her eyes widened. She looked down at the ticket, then back at me. For a moment her lower lip trembled, but she held it together, strong in front of a crowd like an athlete should. She nodded, gripping the frame to her chest. The audience clapped. I could see her mother wiping her eyes in the back row. In that moment something inside me healed. The ticket, once a symbol of all I had given away without return, had transformed into a torch passed to someone who might carry it differently, not as a burden but as fuel. After the ceremony, Emily approached me. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. "I won't forget this." I touched her shoulder. "Play hard, Emily. Play for yourself." That night, as Mrs. Alvarez and I shared our tea, I told her what had happened. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "See, Evelyn, the world does not end when blood disappoints you. Sometimes it begins when strangers become kin." I looked at the 2 cups on my table, at the warmth of her presence in my life, and I knew she was right. I had lost my sons to their own selfishness, but I had gained something richer. A young girl chasing her dream, an old friend by my side, and a community that now carried a piece of my heart forward. The chosen family we build is not always the one we expect, but sometimes it is the one that saves us. In the quiet months after my recovery, I heard less and less from my sons. Their absence became another kind of silence I had to learn to live with. But news travels in a small community. Through neighbors and whispers at the grocery store, I began to hear fragments of their lives unraveling. Lucas had lost his job when the company downsized, and his name was on the list. Ethan, meanwhile, had racked up debts on credit cards and a failed investment scheme. The 2 of them, once united in neglect, were now at odds, arguing over an inheritance they had assumed would solve everything. I was not surprised. For years I had been their safety net, the invisible cushion softening every fall. I had paid overdue bills silently, co-signed loans that nearly ruined my credit, even sold my wedding ring to keep their lights on. They had grown used to the certainty that I would always bail them out. But now, for the first time, that certainty was gone. I remember the day Lucas showed up at my door. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. He looked older than his years, the weight of unemployment pressing on him like a storm cloud. "Mom," he began, his voice tentative. "I just need a little help until I get back on my feet. You know I'll pay you back." I studied him quietly. Once those words would have moved me. I would have rushed to my checkbook, convincing myself that love meant rescue. But this time I shook my head. "I'm sorry, Lucas," I said softly. "But no." His face tightened. "No. After everything you gave to strangers, to some scholarship fund, you can't spare a little for your own son." I felt the sting of his words, but I stood firm. "My love is free, Lucas. My money is not. Not anymore." He clenched his fists, then let them drop. For a moment I saw something raw flicker in his eyes. Not just anger but fear. Fear of failing. Fear of facing the world without me as his crutch. He turned away without another word. I closed the door, knowing this was the first true boundary I had ever drawn with him. Not long after, Ethan called. His voice rushed, almost desperate. "Mom, listen," he said. "Lucas is losing it." They called my name to the front. I walked slowly, each step steady, my heart beating not with fear but with fullness. Emily stood there, shifting nervously from foot to foot. I smiled at her and she returned it, shy yet fierce. I handed her the scholarship certificate, the official proof of support. Then, reaching into my bag, I pulled out a small wooden frame. Inside was the faded ticket from the very first baseball game I had ever attended for my sons. I had kept it for decades, tucked between bills, journals, and prayers, a reminder of where my sacrifices began. I pressed the frame into her hands. "This," I said softly, "was my first seat in the bleachers. I was there cheering with everything I had. I hope you carry it with you and remember that someone believes in you. Don't wait for anyone to see your light. Shine anyway." Her eyes widened. She looked down at the ticket, then back at me. For a moment her lower lip trembled, but she held it together, strong in front of a crowd like an athlete should. She nodded, gripping the frame to her chest. The audience clapped. I could see her mother wiping her eyes in the back row. In that moment something inside me healed. The ticket, once a symbol of all I had given away without return, had transformed into a torch passed to someone who might carry it differently, not as a burden but as fuel. After the ceremony, Emily approached me. "Thank you, ma'am," she whispered. "I won't forget this." I touched her shoulder. "Play hard, Emily. Play for yourself." That night, as Mrs. Alvarez and I shared our tea, I told her what had happened. She smiled, her eyes glistening. "See, Evelyn, the world does not end when blood disappoints you. Sometimes it begins when strangers become kin." I looked at the 2 cups on my table, at the warmth of her presence in my life, and I knew she was right. I had lost my sons to their own selfishness, but I had gained something richer. A young girl chasing her dream, an old friend by my side, and a community that now carried a piece of my heart forward. The chosen family we build is not always the one we expect, but sometimes it is the one that saves us. In the quiet months after my recovery, I heard less and less from my sons. Their absence became another kind of silence I had to learn to live with. But news travels in a small community. Through neighbors and whispers at the grocery store, I began to hear fragments of their lives unraveling. Lucas had lost his job when the company downsized, and his name was on the list. Ethan, meanwhile, had racked up debts on credit cards and a failed investment scheme. The 2 of them, once united in neglect, were now at odds, arguing over an inheritance they had assumed would solve everything. I was not surprised. For years I had been their safety net, the invisible cushion softening every fall. I had paid overdue bills silently, co-signed loans that nearly ruined my credit, even sold my wedding ring to keep their lights on. They had grown used to the certainty that I would always bail them out. But now, for the first time, that certainty was gone. I remember the day Lucas showed up at my door. His shoulders sagged, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. He looked older than his years, the weight of unemployment pressing on him like a storm cloud. "Mom," he began, his voice tentative. "I just need a little help until I get back on my feet. You know I'll pay you back." I studied him quietly. Once those words would have moved me. I would have rushed to my checkbook, convincing myself that love meant rescue. But this time I shook my head. "I'm sorry, Lucas," I said softly. "But no." His face tightened. "No. After everything you gave to strangers, to some scholarship fund, you can't spare a little for your own son." I felt the sting of his words, but I stood firm. My love is free, Lucas. My money is not. Not anymore. He clenched his fists, then let them drop. For a moment I saw something raw flicker in his eyes. Not just anger, but fear. Fear of failing. Fear of facing the world without me as his crutch. He turned away without another word. I closed the door, knowing this was the first true boundary I had ever drawn with him. Not long after, Ethan called. His voice rushed, almost desperate. "Mom, listen," he said. "Lucas is losing it. And when I cut a slice of cake or pour a second cup of tea, it is because I want to, not because I must. Sometimes I think of Lucas and Ethan. I wonder if they ever replay that night in their minds, if they ever hear the echo of the words they read on that folded piece of paper. Perhaps they curse me. Perhaps they pity me. Perhaps finally they see me. But whatever they feel, it no longer dictates my peace. For once their story is not my burden. What lingers instead are the voices of others. Mrs. Alvarez's steady kindness as she sat by my hospital bed. The laughter of Emily, the scholarship girl, holding that framed baseball ticket like it was a crown. The quiet murmur of neighbors who once passed me by, but now nod with respect when they see me carrying my groceries home, shoulders straight. Those voices form a new chorus in my life, one that tells me I am not invisible, not disposable, not forgotten. The steam from my tea curls upward, then fades. I watch it disappear without sadness. Things come and go. Children's innocence, marriages, health, even rings of gold once slipped onto fingers. But dignity once reclaimed does not vanish. It lives inside me now, stronger than the pull of old habits, brighter than the shadows of past mistakes. A smile creeps across my face, small at first, then steady. Not for anyone to see or applaud, but for myself alone. It is the smile of a woman who has walked through fire and chosen to keep walking, who has tasted bitterness but now savors sweetness, who has spent decades serving others a slice and at last sits down to enjoy the whole piece. The room is quiet, save for the ticking clock. I let it fill the space, remind me that time, for all its cruelty, also heals. I am not their afterthought. I was always enough. And for the first time I believe it. For most of my life I spoke to rooms where no one truly listened. Tonight I want to speak directly to you. If you have ever been left behind, if you have ever set a table and stared at empty chairs, I want you to know something important. You are not invisible. Your worth is not measured by who shows up for you or by how loud the crowd cheers from the bleachers. Your value is not in the noise of others. It rests quietly, deeply in you. I learned this lesson late, perhaps later than I should have, but maybe just in time. When no one came, I discovered how to come for myself. When the phone never rang, I found a silence that was not abandonment, but healing. And when my sons chose a ball game over my life, I realized that love cannot be begged or bartered. Love must be freely given. So if you are listening now and have known the sting of being overlooked, please carry this truth with you. You do not need to wait for someone else to see you, to choose you, to prove that you matter. Sometimes the most powerful choice you will ever make is to show up for yourself. If no one else comes, then come for you. I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that same sharp edge? That same emptiness I once carried? Have you ever stood up, dusted yourself off, and whispered, "I deserve better," even when no one else agreed? So I want to hear from you. Tell me your story. Share how you rose, how you reclaimed your ground, how you found peace. Leave it in the comments below, because I promise I will read every single word with gratitude. I do not tell my story for pity. I tell it so that perhaps you will see yourself reflected in it, and in that reflection find strength. Maybe you think I was wrong. Maybe you believe I should have forgiven more, waited longer, or tried harder. So tell me that too. I can hold your thoughts with respect, because what matters most is that we talk about it, that we do not stay silent where silence breeds hurt. Before we say goodbye, let me ask, Where are you listening from right now? Is it a quiet morning, a warm cup of coffee steaming beside you, the sun just breaking through your curtains? Or is it late at night, your world hushed, stories like mine your only company while the rest of the house sleeps? Wherever you are, I hope you feel less alone knowing we share this moment together. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to join us here. Not just to hear more stories like mine, but to belong to a community that still believes in kindness, in healing, and in second chances. I am Evelyn Harper, and I am here. Consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you'll know when another voice rises to share a story you might need to hear. Because sometimes the miracle you're waiting for doesn't arrive as a knock at your door. Sometimes it comes as a voice reaching across the distance, reminding you, you are not forgotten. Thank you for spending these moments with me today. I know how precious your time is, and it humbles me that you chose to share it here. Wherever you are, whatever stage of life you're in, carry this truth with you. You are not anyone's afterthought. You are enough. Take care of yourself. And remember, if no one else comes, come for you. Sometimes the quietest acts of courage, like setting a table for yourself or choosing a life you deserve, are the ones that change everything. Until the next story, I'll be here, Evelyn Harper, waiting with a warm cup of tea, believing in your strength and in the power you hold to show up for yourself.